Hey guys, do you know someone considering renting their property as an Airbnb? I have worked with Rental Advisor for over a decade, and Rental Advisor provides free rental projections to prospective owners, realtors, and investors for any property in the US. So if you know someone considering getting into the vacation rental industry, have them email management@myrentaladvisor.com to get their free revenue projections. So recently, the well-known online atheist, Matt Dillahunty, mocked me on Twitter for believing in the Book of Mormon. So I responded with a joke about how his inclusion of his pronouns in his bio caused me to question his IQ level. Now, maybe this wasn't the most Christian thing to do, but I'm not perfect. Regardless, with such strong feelings about gender, I figured that Matt probably would be able to provide me with a coherent argument about his view on the nature of gender. So I decided to call into his show, with the purpose of this call being to try and answer the following question. How does one determine their gender?
Is this thoughtful faith?
Oh, yeah, it is.
Oh, my goodness. It's thoughtful faith. Jacob, I'm so glad to hear from you.
Oh, because my pronouns are in my bio, you decided that reduced my IQ by 30. Well, let me tell you, Jacob, we could reduce it by 70 and I'd still smoke you.
All right, sounds good. I'm just curious how, I want to understand the nature of this sort of gender and how one even determines their gender.
Okay, so just remember, this whole call is about how one determines their gender. Like, how can a person tell if they are male, female, demi-boy, third gender, or some combination of those?
I mean, you guys obviously care a lot about these pronouns.
How do you determine when you're hungry?
Part of your show.
How do you determine when you're hungry?
How do I determine my biology?
What do you mean your biology? Is there some chromosomal thing that determines your hunger?
My biological systems will indicate to me that I'm hungry.
Sure. So basically what you're saying is that there's a psychological state that you identify as hunger.
So I try and steel man what point I think that he was trying to drive at.
Okay. So you're saying that psychological states, some brain state, would determine a person's gender.
No, that's not what I said at all. Why is it that I can ask you questions and instead of just answering them and having the conversation, you immediately want to go to making another assertion?
What's funny is that I was not making an assertion. I was trying to repeat back the point I felt he was trying to make to see if I understood him correctly.
Well, I'm trying to understand what you mean when you're saying that.
If you're trying to understand, then instead of going running towards the conclusion that you think that you want, we should just talk about the actual issue here. I had other questions. For example, how do you tell what someone's job is? If they tell you that they're a teacher, how do you know if they're telling the truth or not?
You could go and see what they do and get paid for.
Can you? How do you do that?
Yeah, if I wanted to verify what someone's job is, I could go let's say someone says they're a school teacher. I could go and see if that's what they're actually doing.
My God.
You can see him getting concerned as he's losing control of the conversation as I give an answer that he was not expecting. What Matt is doing is trying desperately to avoid acknowledging any sort of objective criteria by which a gender can be determined. And that is why he did not like me connecting hunger with biology or determining someone's job by empirical investigation.
Let's say you're on a bus and you're sitting next to someone and they say, I'm a teacher. Do you have any motivation at all to go investigate them? Or do you just take their word for it that they're a teacher?
I might take someone's word for it, but that doesn't mean that that's what they are. Someone could say that they're a dragon.
So if somebody says that they're a teacher, generally speaking, you're going to take their word for it. The follow-up question was, does that mean they actually are a teacher? And you've already answered that. No, it doesn't. See how much easier this is if you just answer the question you're asked instead of thinking that you're smarter than the person you're talking to when you're not?
Sounds good.
Cool.
So now you've got someone.
And now someone comes up to you, you're sitting next to them on a bus, and they say, "Hi, my name's Bob. This person sitting next to me is Steve. He's a school teacher." What's wrong? What is there anything in that is objectionable?
No.
Do you know that Steve or Bob are actually their real names?
No.
Do you know that the gender of either of them?
Generally, by looking at a person, there are things that you can tell that,
No,
suggest
see, you're not paying
that you're
attention.
a male or a female.
There is a reason he does not want gender connected to any objective method of verification. Because if there is a standard by which a person's gender can be determined, that would also make it possible to tell if a person really was male or female, or demi-boy, or two-spirit, or third gender, etc. And thus, gender would not merely be a social construct. But the real irony is that he, like most atheists, regularly complains about the unfalsifiable claims of religion.
I'm not going to hold an unfalsifiable proposition, is my point.
While at the same time holding that a person's gender claims are unfalsifiable.
Yeah, what I said was, Bob said, "This is Steve. He's a teacher." Does that mean that Steve is being represented as a man with the he pronoun?
No, but if I was looking at someone,
So no. Stop, Jacob. If somebody said, "This is Steve, he is a teacher," you don't think he's being represented as a man?
Oh yeah, he is being represented, man, because he's using a male pronoun.
Pay attention. I went through this pronoun thing 3 times already. So Bob says to you, "This is Steve. He's a teacher." And because of that, you now know someone's pronouns. When you are sitting there talking to Steve, are you going to call Steve Steve?
How a person is being represented by another person is not the question. The question I asked is how we determine someone's actual gender, not just the way someone else is representing their gender.
Yeah,
Are you going to ask Steve for his driver's license or birth certificate before? Are you going to ask Steve for his driver's license or birth? Are you going to ask Steve? Are you going to ask Steve for his driver's license? Are you going to ask Steve? Just so you know, I can put your ass on mute, which I will now. Are you going to ask Steve for his fucking birth certificate or driver's license before you just call him Steve? That's all I was asking. I'll unmute you now.
No, I wouldn't. Go ahead.
Cool. And if you were talking to Bob and you wanted to reference Steve, and Steve had just said, "Yeah, I'm a teacher in a New York school," and Bob said, "My friend Steve here is a teacher in a Pittsburgh school," would you say, "He just said it's a New York school"? Is that how you would address him?
Yeah, I would. I'd look at Bob and say, "Okay,
cool.
yeah, he
Now we've established
in a New York school, so we should believe that."
Now we've established that you're willing to take Bob and Steve at their word on what their names are, on what their gender is, on what their pronouns are, and that you would refer to them respectfully without investigating their genome, without knowing what their chromosomes are, without investigating gametes, without looking at a driver's license, without looking at a passport. For anything that you need to interact with, for anything that makes any difference to you, what they tell you is what it is. Thanks for calling.
Wait, what? Did he answer the question for how a person can determine their gender? I did not feel like he answered it, so I tried to continue the conversation.
Wait,
nothing.
Yeah.
It's really weird. I asked the question about how one determines their gender, and he basically is just mad at me for even asking the question.
You have treated them with respect and talked to them by their name and used their preferred pronouns without challenging thing until it became inconvenient for you to do it on Twitter as a way of showing what an ignorant bigot you are, because you really want to say that you are the arbiter of what somebody else's gender are, and you're not. You never will be.
Yeah, I know. I don't determine a person's gender, which is why I was asking you what aspect of reality determines a person's gender.
You are a bigoted piece of shit. Thanks for calling.
Oh boy. So let's recap what happened. I asked Matt the simple question about how a person can figure out their own gender. First, he gave an analogy of it being like how we determine if we're hungry. And then he shifted to say it's like how we know a person's job because they told us so. And then in the end, he basically just seemed to say that we need to take a person's word for it because, that's what nice people do. And then he hung up on me and called me names.
You are a bigoted piece of shit. Thanks for calling.
I'm not going to lie. For a guy with such a large following online, this was one of the least impressive arguments and interactions I've ever had. But I want to explain why I think Matt behaved the way he did. The reality is that queer theory, which is where these strange notions of gender emerge from, holds to the idea that categorization itself is a form of oppression. Identity categories tend to be instruments of regulatory regimes, normalizing categories of oppressive structures. Once gender is theorized as an oppressive system of classification, both heterosexuality and homosexuality come to be understood as merely artificial categories. Queer theory aims to disrupt the gender binary of male-female. Because Matt and Jimmy adhere to this ideology, they see genders as something determined purely by an individual. So for them to have any outside standard, even biological reality, determine your gender, they would see that as oppressive to a person's expressive individualism and the idea of a self-defined identity that's done by the individual. But here's the problem. If we say Matt is a man, what are we even saying? What constitutes the concept of man? In other words, if man equals X, we're left asking, but what is X? And if X is not defined, then it renders the concept of man completely meaningless. An entire documentary was made by asking people the simple question, what is a woman? Which is simply to say, woman equals X, and then to ask people to define X.
A woman is not anything in particular.
There is not one particular thing.
It could be many things to many people.
Some women have penises, right? Some men have vaginas.
I like scented candles, and I've watched Sex and the City.
Yeah.
How do I know if I'm a woman?
That's a great question.
You're not a scientist. You're not a gender studies major.
No.
How do you know that you're a man?
I guess because I got a dick.
Can a man become a woman?
I'm not a woman, so I can't really answer that.
Women only know what women are.
Are you a cat?
No.
Can you tell me what a cat is? Do you want to tell us what a woman is?
Now here's why that question matters. If X remains undefined, then you have not actually said anything when you use the word woman. But if you define X, then you can say that something does not equal X, and thus a person's gender claim would be falsifiable. So then you get stuck between a rock and a hard place. If you define X, then you exclude anyone who does not meet that criteria or definition. If you don't define X, then you have said nothing. You have rendered the word meaningless. Also, to those who say that X is a social construct, this would mean that what a woman is, and who actually is and is not a woman, is determined by society, which means that society would also be the final decision maker on if a person was not a woman. But let's not be silly. Women exist regardless of the majority opinion about them. Yes, there are some social ideas about the role of women, and those can change. But gender roles and gender are two different things. Gender roles may be socially constructed, but gender is obviously connected to biology, and to detach it from biology renders the concept undefined. Gender is very simple. It's a synonym for sex. In biology, mammals are either male or female, depending on if they produce sperm or if they produce eggs. And in humans, sometimes there are rare deformities in the formation of sexual organs or chromosomes. And psychologically, a small minority of people suffer from gender dysphoria, in which they sometimes feel extreme annoyance with their biological makeup. Both of these groups deserve our empathy and our kindness. But to allow our empathy to erase the very concepts and categories of man and woman, under the guise that these categories are exclusionary and oppressive, is absurd and does not do anyone any good. In fact, it distorts the very basic male-female dynamic that acts as the basis for mammalian life and stable human civilization. Now, I was hoping to be able to engage with these concepts with Matt, but sadly, Matt is not a serious person. He honestly seems to be an online gotcha bully who's unwilling to engage in serious discussion. However, he can prove me wrong. I would like to officially invite Matt to have a formal debate in a forum of his choice on the following. What is the best way to determine one's own gender? It would include opening statements, rebuttals, cross-examinations, and closing statements to ensure that, unlike on his show, we both get an equal amount of time to present our point of view. Now, I have the feeling that Matt is not the kind of person to engage seriously or formally, but the invitation stands. My email is in the video description, and I hope to hear from you, Matt. So do you enjoy the content here on Thoughtful Faith? If so, be sure to hit the notification bell. This ensures that our new videos show up on your feed. Also, be sure to check out our Facebook group called Thoughtful Saints, where myself and others discuss the sorts of topics found on this channel. And lastly, if you think other people would benefit from this video, please be sure to share it.